season with Inter Miami in 2023, but his future beyond that remains unclear. Hello everyone, welcome back to Miami Total Football Radio, an Inter Miami focused podcast providing you all the latest news, updates, analysis, opinions, inside information, general punditry, and much more. We have been listened to in more than 50 countries and counting. My name is Franco Panizo. I am one of your co-hosts, and probably the one that loves speaking Spanglish the most, as well as saying Miami Total Football Radio more than the rest of the team. Of course, they might not love saying Miami Total Football Radio as much as I do, but they do love football. I'm talking about the couple that is and the colleagues that are Jose Armando and Andrea Yanez. Guys, how are you doing? We will start with Andrea. It's been a couple weeks since we've been on a pod, so let's start with Andreita, then we'll go to Jose. Andrea, how are you doing today?
Hello, Franco. Nice to be here. Nice to be back in the podcast. Glad to be talking about Inter Miami again, even though they didn't win the league. We have a lot to talk about and some exciting stuff, so I'm ready to discuss. And since it's a World Cup month, I'm Vengo Violenta. I'm going to say it. Vengo Violenta for this podcast, so prepare for a risita.
What does Vengo Violenta mean for the people that don't speak Spanish? You got to do the Spanglish translations here.
It means I'm coming like Rambo.
She's coming in hot. She's coming in hot.
Yes.
Although Violenta would translate to violent, which I don't know. 2-foot slide tackle from Andrea. I don't know if I want to be on the end of that. Jose, how are you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing good, and also happy to be back. It's been a while. So yeah, and I think we had a good media availability with Chris Henderson and Phil Neville. Maybe not as much information as we would have wanted, but I think we have enough to make an interesting pod and to give people an insight on not only what happened last year, but what's next for Inter Miami.
It's not last year yet, guys, okay? It was maybe you could say this past season, this past year. Yes. But the year's not over yet, all right? The year's not over yet.
It is over. Once you play the final, it's over. Move on to next year.
Wait, by the way, before we get into the Inter Miami stuff, Andrea, tell me what you just told me off the mics, that I influenced Jose Armando in a very positive way in his life, because if I did, I need you to share that with the listeners.
Yes. Let me tell you something. Jose has a song that it's going to be the song of our holiday season, I'm 100% sure, because he heard it on a Franco story. And I know you guys, if you follow or stalk Franco on Instagram, you know he likes some reggaeton. So he passed that on to Jose.
There we go. What song was it? Just so the people are curious.
It was Raúl Alejandro, Que Lo Quiera.
It's a great song.
Because Jose likes reggaeton, but Jose likes old reggaeton better than the new reggaeton.
Yeah.
Jose's being shy now, listeners. Jose's being shy because he was singing the song when we had this conversation off the mics before.
You wanted me to sing this song.
I don't know. No, if you sing on the pod, I think people will turn off the pod after just 4 minutes, and then that's it. Yeah. So let's not sing. Maybe you can sing at the end as your final thought. But anyway, with regards to Inter Miami, we will talk about Phil Neville and his new contract and the length of that contract. We will also talk about the 2023 goals that apparently are in place for Inter Miami, that they have milestones that they want to hit already. We'll talk about the approach to the designated players. We'll talk about Rodolfo Pizarro, Alejandro Pozuelo, Lionel Messi, and all those rumors that continue to pop up, the upcoming MLS expansion draft, and much, much more, as well as with our Q&A session at the very, very end. So, yes, the offseason is officially underway. Let's get to it. All right, guys. So we will start with the week's biggest news. And again, not something that was unexpected. I think anybody that followed Inter Miami, even remotely, knew that Phil Neville was likely coming back, right? That he was coming back because he showed progress with this team and he helped the team surpass expectations and make the playoffs in 2022. So we'll start with Jose. Just your thoughts on Phil Neville being given a new deal to be with Inter Miami for a third straight season.
Yeah, I think it was expected. The minute that Inter Miami made the playoffs, I think that's the moment where he actually signed a new contract or an extension, as it is. I think it's not a surprise that he's back. Although I would say that the 1 year deal thing, it's something that I know we're going to talk about, but I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a little bit, that has a meaning behind just one more year. So there's a lot to discuss there, but I'm not surprised at all that he's back. I think he earned that contract by taking the team to the playoffs, which is something that, as you all know, um, at least I didn't predict. So
Not Andrea, not Jose, not myself. None of us three predicted that. The only one that predicted that is the member of the co-hosting team that's not here today, and that's Steve El Primo Brenner. So he was the only one. Although I feel like he shot in the dark and got a little lucky. But sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. Andrea, just quickly your thoughts on Phil Neville signing a new deal and returning for a third season with Inter Miami in 2023. Because what Jose said is right. There is something juicier with regards to this deal to dive into, but just want to hear your thoughts on him returning in 2023.
Yeah, I think it's not surprising since he got the team to a playoffs. He got the team together. He picked it up and got them together again after that awful start that they had and the bad moments during the season. He accomplished that, but as Jose said, and I am 100% in agreement, it's weird that it's only for a year. And Phil said in the press conference yesterday, when you asked him about that, he tried to justify, like, with his friendship with Beckham and what Jorge Mas and his brother Jose Mas and everyone was saying. But let me tell you, that is weird because I wouldn't feel 100% happy signing a 1 year contract knowing that if you get Lionel Messi next year, then they're thinking, oh, you only have a contract for 1 year, then you're gone when we have Messi and we have the sanctions. We are free of the sanctions in the future. So I would have been doubtful to sign a contract like that, to tell you the truth. But I guess he loves it here, as he said it, and it's not expected for him to come back. So I guess it was the right decision for me. I don't think Inter Miami should have changed coach unless you could have gotten Bielsa, but I think it will be good for the consistency of the team. This year, he's gonna have the majority of the players that he brought last season, so he can build on that. And if he comes and gets them to the goals that they want to meet, we're gonna talk about that later on in the pod. Then he'll get a bigger contract, I guess.
So I guess we're diving into it. Andrea just went headfirst into the topic. So that is interesting that apparently he's only signed a 1 year deal. Now, Inter Miami didn't say outright in their press release that he signed a 1 year deal, right? The press release reads this. Inter Miami CF announced today that head coach Phil Neville has signed a contract extension ahead of the 2023 Major League Soccer season. That's their intro in their press release. It doesn't say that he's only signed a 1 year deal. It just says that he signed a contract extension ahead of the 2023 season. It's been reported that it's only 1 year. Phil Neville said in his own words that it's just 1 year. Part of me doesn't buy that it's only 1 year. Part of me just doesn't. I don't know. Just some, and it's not inside information. Just some part of me just doesn't. It doesn't pass the sniff test.
It's weird.
That it's only weird. 1 year. But let's take it at face value, right? Because otherwise we'll jump into supposition. But let's not jump into supposition just yet, because let's take it at face value that it is a year contract. What does that say about Phil Neville's standing with Inter Miami, or what do you read into that? I go back to Jose here, because I agree with you. It's again, if we take it at face value, it's the juiciest part of the whole thing, even though it wasn't. I guess it was emphasized a little bit, but not overly emphasized in the press conferences at the start of the week on Monday. Jose, your thoughts?
I would say that I do agree. To start out, I do agree that it is 1 year. I believe that it's 1 year, I should say. I went back into both press conferences, and there are some things that caught my attention. For example, Phil said within 3 seasons you have to win. Conversations weren't long. You have to produce, and next year is the year we have to produce in terms of titles, winning something. I think that's what Jorge Mas wants. He wants a winning team. And when you give Phil one more year to really accomplish what they want, because they don't want 6th or 7th place. They don't want a team that struggles, that's inconsistent, that's up and down throughout the season. You win 3 games, you lose 4. That's not what they want, because they know that's not a good formula for South Florida. And we have seen it in the stands. I mean, when you have an inconsistent team that's not relevant, people are not going to go to the stadium. And they know the way to go here is to win. You have to win. You have to be consistent. And to me, Phil signing a 1-year deal means this is your last chance. That's what that means. And I tweeted something yesterday that goes something like, okay, if Phil is indeed the coach that you want to develop players and to just develop the franchise as a whole as well, you don't give him a 1-year deal. You give him more time. Now is the time to do that. And to me, it feels like they don't feel it right now. And they are giving him an opportunity to do something in 2023. If he's able to at least get close to winning a championship, then he might convince them that he's the right guy. But if you sign just 1-year deal, it's not a good look.
So again, I'm going to reiterate this because, and again, it's November of 2022. So in a year from now, we could look back on this conversation and say you're completely off base. I'm still not buying. It doesn't pass the sniff test to me that it's a 1-year deal. It just doesn't pass the sniff test. And maybe it is. Maybe it is, and I'm off base there. But it just doesn't. Phil Neville and his agent, and when they sat down with Inter Miami and they had those negotiations, I can't imagine he was like, all right, I'm signing a 1-year deal, and I'm just going to take that. Like, it's hard for me to imagine someone as experienced in the sport, as a player, as a coach. I can't imagine that's the best deal he could work out or his agent could work out, especially after coming off a season in which he helped the team make the playoffs. I just it's hard for me to believe that. But again, taking it at face value, if that's the case, if he has only signed, and I will stress, if he has only signed a 1-year deal or 1-year extension through 2023, then it's clear that Inter Miami is not convinced on the job that Phil Neville has done on the whole. Because this year they surpassed expectations and they made the playoffs. But the first year, with a roster that arguably was more talented, they flailed and they missed the playoffs, and it was in large part a disaster. So 1 season, good. 1 season, bad. So put that together, you get a middling grade. That means that the 3rd year would be the make or break year. If he can get the team back to the playoffs, or he can get them to an Open Cup final, or he can get them to a home playoff game, because he did say, he said he wants to finish in the top 4 in the Eastern Conference. If he can accomplish one of those things, then maybe there's a clause in his contract that says, all right, he can return for 2024 or 2025. I don't know. Again, supposition there, because we don't, this is just me talking out
Franco,
loud.
What's the definition of a good season? Why would you say it's a good season? And would you say it's a good season for the ownership? Because there's something as well that caught my attention that Phil said, and he didn't say it for the first time, because he did mention something like this in the post-match press conference after they were eliminated, and he said that 6th place is not success for him. So is this really a good season for Inter Miami?
Yes, it was a good season for Inter Miami, because they were faced with massive sanctions. They had to make a significant overhaul of the roster. Again, none of us three thought they were making the playoffs. And it's not just about what our opinions are. There was a lot of opinions. A lot of the consensus out there, even from some of the fan base, was that this team would not make the playoffs in 2022. But they did. So I think that is it is, like they said, like both Phil Neville and Chris Henderson said, that is progress, but I do think that makes 2022 a success. Now, if you're looking bigger picture and you analyze it and you take a deeper analysis of Inter Miami and where it wants to be, then yes, you can look at it and say, okay, by the numbers, not the greatest of seasons. By the numbers, right? Let's look at their record from 2022. They went 14, 6, and 4. That's 14 wins, 6 draws, 14 losses. So they finished with a 500 record. So by definition, mediocre. By definition. They scored 47 goals, and they had 56 scored on them. They finished with a -9 goal differential. That was tied for third worst in the Eastern Conference. But they still made the playoffs. So again, it's a successful season. Now, when you analyze it on the bigger scale and you say, okay, next year, the numbers need to be much better. And you heard Chris Henderson and Phil Neville talk about that, about the road form being better. Chris Henderson, and I did not ask, I know I get tongue-in-cheek comments about my penchant for asking about attacking set pieces, because I've done it quite often, probably more so than anyone else in the Inter Miami press corps over the last 3 years. But I didn't ask it this time, and Chris Henderson said during his press conference in one moment, quick little snippet, he said we need to be better on attacking set pieces, and that's going to be a focus this offseason, which I thought was interesting hearing him say that, because what are they going to do, sign more center backs, sign a designated set piece taker? I mean, that's interesting. But anyway, so yes, there's a lot of room for improvement for this team. 100%. 100%. And I think that's where the thought lies. I think that they're like, okay, yes, we exceeded expectations, but we can be much, much better. And that's apparently the aim in 2023. Andrea, your thoughts on all of the things we just talked about?
No, like I said before, I think a 1-year deal is frankly, if we're speaking frankly, I have to say that the owners, the team, the management are not thinking about Phil for the long run. They are not. They are like, I could give you an example, like when the Dolphins had Brian Flores, they had a bad team. Now they fired him and brought a new coach and brought new players. That is what I feel is going to happen with Phil in the future. He's not gonna get Inter Miami is gonna get rid of the sanctions about the caps in spending the money they want to spend. They're gonna bring players. They're gonna bring big names, and they're gonna try to bring another coach, because I feel that a 1-year contract is telling you, like, I don't trust you. I don't trust you for the future. I don't trust you can take this team for the next step in the future. Because frankly, for me, manager signing for 1 year, that's just like, you usually do that when you're an interim manager and you do well. And even then, you get a 3-year deal. And Phil has already been here for this. This is going to be his 3rd year. So I was really surprised that he accepted a 1-year deal, to tell you.
I don't think it's a 1-year deal. I don't think so.
But how much leverage, if you're Phil's agent, do you have when you go into the conversation?
I think you have a decent amount after you just help the team make the playoffs, even despite that they were 14, 6, and 14. They made the playoffs.
How many points between 6th and 8th place this year in the Eastern Conference?
2.
How many points?
2.
Okay, so you were basically...
Yes, Jose, but here in this league, you can be a bad coach like Ben Olsen and get another job.
Jose,
So,
we
that
thought.
anything.
Listen, it's not. A lot of us thought. A lot of media members thought this team was finishing 10th, 11th, and below.
No, I agree 100%. Listen, I'm actually here advocating for Phil, but I want to be as well realistic in the fact that, if ownership, if they wanted to give him a 1-year deal, there's not a lot that you can say if you're Phil's agent.
I disagree with that. I disagree with that. I disagree with that heavily.
Jose. A 1-year deal is not a norm in
a coach, like
especially
any
in MLS.
person, like a coach like any person, especially on the younger side, they're gonna want job security and stability.
Yeah, exactly.
And why would a 1-year deal be like, okay, that's fine, I'm okay with that? Yeah, no, I think Phil Neville did have leverage at the negotiating table. I think he could have been like, hey, look, I just helped this team get to the playoffs. Hey, you want to stress continuity? You want me to build on this foundation that I've just shown you that I can do well with? Then I need more than 1 year. I do think he had leverage. That's why, again, I can't imagine this is like just a 1 year deal, just like clean cut like that. I can't imagine. Maybe there's clauses there. If he doesn't do this, then they split ways or they part ways, or maybe he takes another role in the organization or whatever.
He doesn't have a lot of experience as well. I mean, he doesn't have a lot of experience. And Franco, let's be honest. Like, you know, three weeks before the end of the regular season, a lot of people thought it's over. They're not going to be in the playoffs. They went into
they went to the playoffs.
But that's something that, you know, if you go back to the season, you don't analyze the season based on the last 3 weeks.
You analyze it as a whole, sure. Then they went 14, 6, and 14. Correct. I agree with you. But they made the playoffs. There are some things
within the stats that you put more value into it. You know, it's not like you go 500 and okay, that tells me the whole story. There are some other things like, you know, the development of young players. Tell me, how many young players, did you see develop during this season? How many players did you see perform at a higher level than when they started the season? I think there's only one player on that list, and that's Drake Callender.
No.
Tell me out of the young players.
Okay, I will. I will. No. So I will tell you. of the young players. Listen, I've been probably the most critical media member of Phil Neville, at least locally. So, and I've said it, when it's time to give credit where it's due, I'm more than willing to do so. And Phil Neville, with Drake Callender, with Ame Mabika, and with Ryan Saylor, if you're telling me that Ame Mabika and Ryan Saylor did not perform above what you expect,
the same player. They are exactly
the same as they started.
Ryan Saylor's a rookie.
Yes, he performed. Mabika is exactly the same as he started.
I don't think so.
Noah Allen didn't grow anything, lost his place even in the national team. He's not the starter anymore. So what are the young players that are developing in the team? Emerson didn't develop anything. Phil said he didn't like him since the first month that he got him. He said he was going to work with him.
I don't recall him saying he didn't. He never said he didn't like him. He never. I can't believe I'm Phil. I have taken Steve.
Where is the work with Emerson? Where is the work with Mavika? Where is the work with Saylor? Where is the work with Noah Allen? Where is the work with Ascona and all of the other players that are young? It doesn't exist.
I have taken the mantle from Steve Brenner for the short term, and I am now Phil Neville's lawyer, apparently, because I can't believe I'm holding on to this title now. I can't believe you guys would say, based on what we saw from Ame Mabika and Ryan Saylor, that they did not perform acceptably for being young center. Okay, then
it's acceptably, wow. Franco, is one thing, but if you measure from the beginning of the season to the end, they are exactly the same player as they were at the beginning of the season.
I don't agree with that. I don't think Ryan Saylor was the same.
They didn't grow. Didn't grow.
Disagree.
I don't think play they didn't grow.
Don't agree.
You could see it at the last game.
No way. I don't agree with that.
I think there are some things that, you know, we might look at the minutes that they played and think, oh, okay, yes, they did perform. They have been playing regularly. They have X amount of starts. So, yeah, they're doing good. But if you take a closer look and if you really look at the performances of those players, you will realize they haven't changed much from where they started.
I disagree.
And I think, you know, here's a perfect example. Last year, you remember Christian Macun?
Mm-hmm. Of course.
Christian Macun played for Inter Miami, and there were high expectations about him. What happened with Christian Macun?
They traded him.
I mean, he left the team, and he ended up just being another player.
Listen, all right. Let's get to the crux of this. Let's get to the gist, because we're going into side tangents here. I can agree with the overall premise that the jury's out on if Phil Neville is a good developer of young players. I would agree with that thought or that question, like that being a valid question, because again, for me, year 2, I think we saw some young players make progress. You guys don't agree with that, but okay. All right. In year 1, besides Christian McCoon, I don't think there was any young player in the team that really showed progress. So again, back to like the overall, like when I said about the overall body of work that Phil Neville has had with the team, okay, let's look at the body of work with young players. In my opinion, this is my opinion because obviously you guys don't share it, in his first season, not a great developer of young players. In the second season, like with the team itself, thought he made progress in that regard. And I think Ryan Saylor and Ime Mabika are examples. Were they miles better than they were at the start of the year? No, but they were better. I think so. Now, I think Damian Lowe's slip in form and his dip in form, I think that had a big part to do with the defense having a lot of issues, and that may be exposing Mabika and Saylor a bit more in your guys' eyes. But I think that they did get better. And Drake Callender absolutely was miles better from when he started the year.
Callender is the only one, and he works more with the preparador de porteros than with the coach. So for me, I would have to see an advancement in young players. Like I tell you, Noah Allen, Emerson Rodriguez, Mavika, Saylor, they be better. You see other teams in the league and they have young players, they have young talents, and Jose was mentioning Macun, who was a player that they thought could grow, then they traded him. But then you have Julian Carranza, who Phil didn't rate last year, and he said, oh, he need like the same things that he says now about Emerson Rivaldo. He said about Julian Carranza, he couldn't get used to the league. And look, with a good coach who understands the qualities and capacities of a young player, look the season that he had.
Wow. So
Lewis Morgan, the same.
Well, so I've never been one to say Phil Neville is Pep Guardiola, but you just essentially just you just ripped Phil Neville indirectly.
What I'm trying to say is that he cannot work, at least until this moment in his career, he cannot develop a player when he gets it. It doesn't matter if he's young, especially when he's young. I don't think Phil gets the best on the player, because Phil is a coach who likes players who are dependable, who can sacrifice for the team and play in positions even though it's not their position. But I think there are we have talked about the players in the team right now, and there are examples, Julian Carranza and Luis Morgan, that prove that the approach that Inter Miami and the coaching staff at Inter Miami, not only Phil, the whole coaching staff,
I think you're going on a tangent, Andrea.
Didn't work.
You're going on a tangent. It's I agree that the fact that Luis Morgan and Julian Carranza can both exceed somewhere else and exceed miles more than they did with Phil Neville as their head coach in 2021. I agree with that, but I don't think that has to do with young talent. I don't think that has to do with young talent.
He didn't put Carranza in
but that's now we're getting away from the young talent developer, like that's the talking point that we just had.
Because yes, you need to play
Luis Morgan. Okay, but that's different than now you're now it's a different, but that's a different criticism, Andrea. That's a different criticism. That's a different criticism.
And he had to come out.
That's a different criticism.
Conference to say I don't play as a 9.
Completely different criticism than saying he's not a developer of young talent. To say, okay, maybe he doesn't play players to his strengths, that's completely different than saying he's not a developer of young talent.
And to be honest, this is a problem. This is a problem not only for Inter Miami, but this is a problem around the league. I think there are players that should be better, and I think as a whole, the league should be a lot better in terms of developing players. So, I mean, I would close out by saying, most of the young players need to get at Drake Callender's level. What we saw from Drake Callender was a lot of improvement. I mean, he was a starter and he deserved to start. And if you look at Mavika and Saylor, you needed to, those guys they were going to play right next to Damian Lowe, but you never thought, okay, even with Damian Lowe not playing at a high level, you never thought, okay, this is the moment where Mavika and Saylor start. It was always the guy that's going to be next to Damian Lowe. So, if they were to develop at a higher level, then that wouldn't be the conversation. And some of those guys would have taken Damian Lowe's spot in the starting lineup, because Damian Lowe did struggle towards the end of the season. So I think, there's those are some of the things that maybe this year, if Phil is able to take the next step with the young guys, that would be something as well that might be relevant to the ownership, looking forward to 2024. But
So
in the end, I
here's
think
another young player. Here's another young player.
all right, throw a name.
Bryce Duke.
Nah, but Bryce Duke Bryce Duke. He didn't develop Bryce Duke. I mean, and still the same. Bryce Duke is exactly the same player that we saw in the start of the season. We saw exactly the same player. He just played more with Inter Miami, but he didn't develop. Plus, Bryce Duke is a natural talent. I mean, he's good by nature. I mean, he was.
I don't know.
Was
out of the four players, I'd say Bryce Duke. He had his moments at the attack. It stands out because he helps create goals. It's a little more eye catching than a center back. I would say out of the four, he probably, in my opinion, developed the least from what I saw. Out of the four, that's just me.
Bryce Duke?
Yes, out of the four. But I still think he developed. I think he developed a little bit. I don't think he's exactly the same player in preseason as he was at the end of the season. I think he was a little bit better. Not anywhere close to a finished product. Not even close to where he probably needs to get at to be a starter on Inter Miami. But I think he made progress. And Drake Callender's the biggest example. All three of us were there. We were the only media members there at that preseason game against CF Montreal, where Drake Callender makes two mistakes late on, and Inter Miami goes from winning 1-0 to losing that game 2-1. And as I've reported multiple times on this podcast, sources had told me, Drake Callender got an earful from the coaching staff. I believe from Phil Neville. It's been a while, so I'd have to go back and check again. But I believe Phil Neville gave him an earful, and that was a big learning moment for Drake Callender. And I've talked to Drake Callender about that, and that was a massive moment for him, where he was like, either I need to rise to the occasion, or I'm going to sink and not be able to swim. And that helped him. So, again, I agree with you guys in general that the jury's out on if Phil Neville's a good developer of young talent, but I think this year, again, he made progress. And this is something that neither one of you has mentioned. I think part of why we may not see Phil Neville turn to young players in starting roles all that often is because of the pressure he's under. Because he needs to win games. He needs to help this team get to that next step, right? So young players tend to make mistakes. You have to go through growing pains with them. And can Phil Neville, given his position, given the, I'm not going to say the hot seat he's on, but given the position he holds at one of the more high-profile clubs in MLS, a team that, like you guys said, and like Jose, you were alluding to about, what the ownership wants and all the eyeballs that can be on Inter Miami. Does he have the luxury, especially think about 2023 on a one-year contract, if that's what we're going with, does he have the luxury to lose games because he's developing youngsters? No, he doesn't have that job security. So he has to turn to more reliable players, or players that are performing more consistently. Look, he gave Robbie Robinson plenty of run this year before the injuries. Last year, Robbie Robinson was inconsistent, but he wasn't afraid to turn to Robbie Robinson. If the players produce in the limited amount of time that they get, then I think that he'll turn to them more. They haven't produced. But I agree that the jury's still out on if Phil Neville is a good developer of young talent. Okay,
and that's a good point, just to help people understand the conversation, right? Because we might go several ways here in terms of opinions, but what we were talking about is finding reasons why he didn't get more than 1 year. And that's why I brought the topic about, young players. Maybe that's one thing that they want to see feel improved. They want to see the team improve. They want to see players.
I think that's really difficult, Jose. I think that's really difficult to develop young players while also needing to win right now. Like, again, young players will go through growing pains. Young players are going to make mistakes that will cost you games. They will not score chances. They will make mistakes at the back that lead to goals. Like, it's going to happen. It's going to cost you games. But if you're in a win-now mentality...
If it did happen with Drake Callender, why can't it happen with Noah Allen? Why it couldn't happen with some of the other players? I mean, you believe that Sailor and Mavica were good, that they showed some development. I don't think so. But, why didn't it happen more? And it just happened with one player. That again, this are maybe talking points here that if we think of, maybe she would think the same way.
Think about it. Exactly.
It's those are things that you go into consideration. Like, personally, I think I wouldn't have signed Phil for 1 year. I would have given more, because and I think this is something that he did mention as well in the press conference. If you have a long-term contract, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be here for 3 or 4 years. I mean, they can cut you.
At any moment.
At any moment. So, I mean, you can get caught in the first 3 weeks of the season. That could be the case. And so, but I just think, it would, and to your point, it would give him a little bit of more of breathing room when you go to work every day and you don't have that pressure, because you have to feel that pressure if you only have 1 year deal. So,
all right, let's move on. Let's move on, because we've stuck there for a while. Let's move on, because I think we all agree that 1 year is a bit eyebrow raising. I think if he meets the goals that he has set out for himself and the team has set out, then he'll get a longer extension. And maybe that's part of the gentleman's understanding or the clauses in the contract. Maybe, but we don't know. Okay, and it's really storming right now because the hurricane is on its way. But speaking of the goals, and I mentioned the hurricane because you might hear it in the background. But speaking of the goals for 2023, Phil Neville said in the press conference they want to finish top 4 in the Eastern Conference. It's something he said in the post-game press conference, if I'm not mistaken, after the loss to the NYCFC. This time he also emphasized being better on the road and having a home playoff game, which goes hand in hand with finishing in the top 4 in the Eastern Conference, unless, as has been reported as of late, that MLS may consider changing its playoff format. So, anyway, your thoughts on Inter Miami trying to finish in the top 4 in the Eastern Conference next season? Do you believe that is, obviously we're far removed from the start of the season and what this roster might look like, but do you believe that that's a realistic next step for this foundation and this team? Andrea?
Yeah, it should be the goal. If you made it to the playoffs last year and made it in 6th place, the goal should be to make it to the playoffs and make it in a better position so that you can get home field advantage and you can explore more and have more chances of getting a win, playing in front of your fans. So I think that is the next step that they need to look forward. I think it's a good and a realistic above everything, a realistic goal for them to make, because listen, this team has had many problems and everyone criticizes them because in the past they have promised to win, to bring Messi, Ronaldo and all of that and win the league and go to a CONCACAF Champions League, win US Open Cup, and they haven't done it yet. So I think setting up this goal of 4th place is an attainable goal, especially if you're building up on the last season and looking forward to keep building what is Inter Miami.
Jose?
Yeah, I think, that's the way to go right now. I think so. But, if the team gets significantly better with DP signings, then, 4th place might not be enough and you might want to go for more. I don't know if that's going to be the case. DPs are always important in this league, and I think it's going to depend on the names that you bring. But yeah, ideally you want to have at least one home playoff game, and if you're in 4th place, that means you're having an okay season, a good season. And again, I think the main thing for Inter Miami and the one thing that fans might be looking for next year is consistency. They want to have a team that they're not going to get frustrated when they watch a team that they go on losing streaks and then they look like the worst team in the league, and then they win 3 games and they are looking like the best team in the league. So I think consistency is the first thing, and then I think if you're consistent, you might end up in 4th place or better.
I think it's good for the team to look to set goals to improve on what it accomplished this year. Absolutely. I mean, that's how it should be. I think 4th place is ambitious. It's ambitious because this team will once again have sanctions. It will need to find new DPs, and I think that's what they're banking on. And I think Phil Neville kind of alluded to it in terms of when he said it towards the end about the DPs, how they're the difference, and I agree that they are the difference in MLS. He pointed to Gareth Bale as an example in the MLS Cup final, although Gareth Bale is not a DP, but we understand his point. Phil Neville's point. I think they're banking on the DPs being what carries them into that fourth place position. But I think it's ambitious. I think it's really ambitious. Because they're going to have these sanctions again. And they're going to have players overachieve. I don't think it's just going to be on the DPs to deliver for Inter Miami. I think other players will have to perform as well. So we'll see how it goes. But that's where the bar is. Jose, okay, you heard the bar. It's fourth place. That's what they're measuring themselves up against. Right? And Phil Neville said they want to win MLS Cup. They want to stand on the podium with the trophy, with the owners, with the fans, the confetti. They want to get to that point. But, he said you got to build blocks. And he said that next step for them is fourth place in a home playoff game. So next year when we start judging them, because I don't know, you gave me a hard time this year for saying that the playoff was the bar. Because you thought they were no way in chance that they could make that, and et cetera, et cetera. That's where the bar is. They've said it publicly. It's fourth place in the top four.
Yeah, but I mean, we can make decisions when it comes to when we see the roster. I mean, they're never going to tell you we're going to finish in 10th place and that's our goal. But,
No, but they also wouldn't say we're going to win MLS Cup.
And they get no DPs. You're not going to...
Listen. Do you think the Colorado Rapids come into every season saying we want to win MLS Cup? I mean, sure, you'll get some bits and pieces of why not?
Well, Chicago Project Gideon, they said they were winning.
So my point is that teams will give you a fair assessment inside of or outside of the cliches and yes, we want to try to make it for the win it all and all that. You'll hear realistic expectations and goals if you listen closely enough or you listen long enough. And again, Inter Miami, Phil Neville said it. Yes, they want to win a MLS Cup. Absolutely. Why wouldn't they? But that next step, their next goal, their next big goal is to finish in the top four. So, So let's quickly touch on the DPs because there are quite a few questions about the DPs. It's obviously going to be a big talking point about Inter Miami going into this winter. Right now, they have 2 DP slots available and open as of right now. That's because one is being filled still by Rodolfo Pizarro, whose loan with Monterrey is over. He's still on the books with Inter Miami, still under contract with Inter Miami. So right now, as of today, in November, he is the only DP on Inter Miami's roster. Judging from what Chris Henderson said during his portion of Monday's press conferences, I don't think Rodolfo Pizarro stands any chance of returning to Inter Miami. Chris Henderson is a pro's pro, and he knows how to frame things and say things without, being overly critical or anything like that. But when you hear him say, we're in negotiations with Monterrey, we're in talks with Monterrey and Pizarro, if Inter Miami wanted Pizarro back, they don't need to be in negotiations. They just bring him back because he's under contract. If they're in negotiations, they're trying to find a way to unload him, get rid of him, and not have him be part of this team in 2023. So I don't expect Rodolfo Pizarro to come back. Now, if they can't find a solution, they can't come to terms with Monterrey, if they can't figure something out with Pizarro, then, there's a chance, I guess, he could come back, or they'd have to buy him out or whatever, but I just don't see Pizarro playing for this team.
He's already here in Miami. He's training here in Miami. He posted on his Instagram. So I'm guessing Pizarro is, if the team doesn't pay him, the team doesn't want to sell him for a loss because no one is paying them $19 million for Pizarro right now. If the team doesn't want to sell him, the team doesn't want to buy his contract, he's going to get his money. And he's not going to negotiate and accept a lesser deal. I think he's going to try and get his money and leave if they want to pay him. But I don't think Pizarro is giving them anything back because of the experience he's had here and with the team and with everything that happened the first year he was here.
Jose, your thoughts on Pizarro? It sounds like you agree with me. There's no chance in your mind that Pizarro returns.
Yeah, I do agree. I don't think there's a chance. I don't think the team wants him back.
Right.
And I think that's the end of that's the end of the line. I mean, if the team doesn't want you, I mean, you can go through negotiations, but you're absolutely right. If you really want a player, then you just welcome him back and all right, we're happy to have you.
Right, arms wide open, the door's wide open. Welcome back, Pizarro. But based on what Chris Henderson said, or what he didn't say, maybe is the better way to frame that, is that it doesn't sound like Pizarro is welcome back at Drive Pink Stadium by this current leadership.
It's gonna be interesting to see what they do with Pizarro. What kind of deal?
Worst comes
are
to
they
worst, I
going
think they
to
buy
get?
him out. Worst comes to worst, I think they buy him out. I don't think that
Yeah.
I don't think that they bring him back and have him fill up a DP spot. Like, there was a lot of talk in this press conference about the characters and whether it fits the locker room and bringing players that continue to fit into what they've built in terms of that positive aura, that hardworking aura. And again, they never directly mentioned Pizarro by name, but I don't know if Pizarro was the most positive beacon of light during his first season or his season.
That they're gonna get something like with Matuidi, that they had to continue to pay him.
No. Because Pizarro's young enough, much younger than Matuidi was at that point, where he's going to want to continue playing. Like, yes, he can earn a payday, but he can also go play, and I'm sure he wants to continue playing. So I don't think it'll be the same situation. I think Inter Miami could buy him out, and in that way it could be similar to Matuidi, but I don't think we'll see Pizarro walking around in a Miami facility
being an ambassador.
Right? I think he has his mind on his career.
I there are two things that Phil mentioned in the press conference that might connect to the Pizarro conversation. They might not be related at all, but it leaves you to think about it. He said, "We will not compromise the type of player that we want. We won't let anybody in that he's a bad person." And he did mention as well his first season. And he said, "We suffered in my first season. We had a group that was good individually, but didn't fit into a team."
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So you could interpret it. You could interpret it, right? You could read between the lines and say,
yes,
that could be Pizarro, or he could be one of those players. And I think it is. Listen, I'm convinced between the exchanges we saw of him on Twitter and Gonzalo Higuain, like the comments about Higuain and how he I think, look, it's clear that it just wasn't a good fit once Diego Alonso left, or once Gonzalo Higuain arrived. Just Pizarro was the odd man out, and it just became irreconcilable. It's just not something.
It might be the same scenario for Leandro González Pires, who was, by the way, included in the.
Well, he's still in the contract, but he's on loan to River Plate for 2 years. Right? So this will be he's finished one season, so he's got another season with River Plate still to go. So.
Just to be fair, just so that people don't think we were hating on Pizarro.
Yeah, exactly. No, and I if you see it to the point of the team, you can see what they're saying. But that is what I was talking at the beginning. If I was Pizarro, I guess he's here and he's trying to put pressure on them, because the way they have treated them, if you see it as
he's probably got
an
meetings
impartial
and stuff.
person,
he's got negotiations. He's got to sit down and talk with them. They still all have the rights to his pass, su pase. So I'm sure that's probably part of the reason he's here. He probably also doesn't hurt to be in South Florida and spend some downtime in Miami. So
So
I don't think it's a difficult situation. If I'm honest, I don't think it will be that hard for Pizarro to find another team. I think in Mexico, I think
he listen. I have heard some comments from people in the media that maybe don't know CONCACAF football that well, but they said, "Oh, no one wants to buy Pizarro." Listen, no one wants to buy Pizarro because Inter Miami is asking for their investment back. They bought him for almost $19 million, so no one is paying that right now because he had a decline and he went on loan and all what we've been talking about. But it's not because he's not an interesting player. If Pizarro gets free from Inter Miami,
he's not an interesting player.
They buy out their contract. He's gonna go to a big team in Mexico.
He's not an interesting player. I'm sorry.
I think MLS is not a league for him.
He's not an interesting player, though. He's just not. To me, he's not an interesting player. I just don't see enough in him to say he's an interesting player. Like, he had his moment in Liga MX, and at the pinnacle of his career, where he was being an impact player for Mexico's national team, and he had the run in the Champions League, all that. But then after that, there was talks of him going to Europe, and he didn't go to Europe. Where did he go? He went to Inter Miami. So, and then from there, his star faded completely.
Miami offered him that they were going to take him to Europe.
And if he had European suitors at his door, he would have just gone straight to Europe. So I don't think he's that interesting of a player. Does he have qualities? Sure. Like,
he's not a DP, but he's gonna find a team in Mexico because he's good. I mean, he's a good.
Okay, enough about Pizarro. My brother's ears must be bleeding because he's a staunch advocate and to this day a staunch defender of Pizarro. So his ears must be bleeding. He's probably, when he hears this podcast, he will probably...
No, but I like Pizarro. I have defended Pizarro.
Pozuelo time. No, we're going to Pozuelo. Is Pozuelo coming back? Is Pozuelo coming back based on what you guys interpreted or what you guys read in between the lines of what was said on
No, they
Monday?
don't want to pay Pozuelo.
I think the Pozuelo thing is something that it didn't bother me because I don't think there's something that can actually bother me about Inter Miami, but I just felt like it's just a little bit disrespectful to Pozuelo that they're putting him on hold after he basically took Inter Miami to the playoffs last year. I mean, and if you go back and you listen at the press conference, they are basically putting him on hold as they wait for better options, what they believe they could find better options. This is what Phil said when I think Andrea asked him about, the conversations about the players that were coming back. He said it was a 2-minute conversation. Really easy. So it's not a 2-minute conversation to make
I want Pozuelo.
Back. When you have the core that worked offensively, because let's be honest, Inter Miami made it to the playoffs because they started scoring. Because defensively they were not good. They started scoring, and they started scoring because of Pozuelo. Forget about Gonzalo Higuain without Pozuelo, because I think we all learned that when Gonzalo Higuain mentioned Pozuelo, he admired Pozuelo, and Gonzalo Higuain understood that the team was completely different when Pozuelo was on the field. And if Higuain trusts enough Pozuelo, then I think, there's something good about him. So I don't know. I think that's a player that they need back. And if I'm Pozuelo at this point, unless I don't have any other option in the league, I take Inter Miami. But if you put me on hold after I took you to the playoffs last year, I think that's disrespectful. And for me personally, if I had to make the decision for Pozuelo, I would have said you have to go someplace else.
I disagree with you. And I said this on the podcast the last time out. I wrote about it on miamitotofutbol.substack.com. I took a look at Pozuelo and Campana's standing. Leonardo Campana is coming back and is likely coming back as a young DP. So he is likely to fill one of those 2 vacant, as of right now, DP spots. Meaning that there's only, as of right now, or not as of right now. If Campana returns as a young DP, that means there would only be 1 DP spot available up until the moment when Pizarro is no longer a DP. And I think that they want to go younger. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Pozuelo is on the wrong side of 30. Yes, he was a big part of what they accomplished this season. A massive part. But longer term, is he a piece that you want to build around as your DP number 10? Probably not.
Pozuelo is 31 years old.
Pozuelo's 31 years old. You're right. That's not that old. But in a league that, like Phil Neville said, continues to get younger, is that the player you want to build around? Is that the number 10 that you...
They continue to get younger, but they're not there yet. If you're 31 years old, you can play in MLS.
I think you can get a better number 10. I think you can get a better number 10. Especially who go look around South America, go look around the world. You can get a better number 10. You're going to have to pay.
Who has experience in the league? Who's proven? Who was the MVP? Who took you to the playoffs?
By that token, then, Inter Miami should go and sign Pelé, because Pelé, won all these things. Yes.
No, but do they have time for that, for a player to come here, sign a player?
Hey, that's the gamble that they're willing to take. That's clearly the gamble that they're open to taking. And
it's unfair with Pozuelo, because
how is that unfair?
It is,
how is that unfair?
We have said it here 1,000 times. He was not the coaching staff, not no one else, Bryce Duke. No.
I shake my head. I've shaken my head a good bit on this podcast, and I guess since we're not a video podcast, not yet anyway, that you haven't been able to see it, but yes, Pozuelo was a big part of it. No denying that. But Pozuelo was not this wow player either for every single game out. Think about
He
him.
was the
Think
reason they got
about
to the
him. Think
playoffs.
about him during the stretch, the final stretch of the season. Think about it. Which game during that final stretch of the season were you like, wow, Pozuelo se metió un partidazo. Oh man, Pozuelo had a monster game. When was the? If you guys can give me that game right now off the top of your head, I'll say okay. I'll reconsider what I'm saying. Towards the end, Pozuelo was lackluster, subpar. The game against NYCFC, and yes, not many players had a good game there, but did he stand out? No. Higuain stood out in terms of the effort he put forth, in terms of him looking to try to control and put his stamp on the game. Did you get that same impression from Pozuelo? And he was coming off an injury, and so give him his share there, or his fair share there, his fair shake. But Pozuelo towards the end didn't show a whole lot.
I'm going to ask you a question. And that should prove my point. Without Pozuelo, do you think Inter Miami makes the playoffs?
No, they don't make the playoffs without Pozuelo.
There it is. And you measured the season for Inter Miami being a success. Why?
Because they made the playoffs. But that doesn't mean that he should be a long-term piece. He's 31 years old, Jose. He's 31 years old.
Yeah, but
he's 31 years old.
I'm sorry
Franco,
to tell you.
age is a number, especially for MLS. Dani Alves is 40. He's going to go to a
Andrea,
World Cup.
if I'm
Cristiano
Inter
Ronaldo
Miami,
is 40 and he's going to go to a World Cup.
If I'm Inter Miami,
if Cristiano Ronaldo says right now, I want to go to play to Inter Miami, are they not going to bring him because he's 38 years old?
It would definitely be a consideration not to bring him, but I'm sure they would bring him overall because he'd put butts in the seats. He's Cristiano Ronaldo, of course. But if you're doing a fair evaluation, you're doing an analysis of the player. Obviously, being at that age
you are
is not
sounding like people who said Bale as a flop at LAFC, and he's the reason they won the title, man. Let's be serious.
You're going on another tangent, which I will not dive into.
That's
Gareth Bale had the biggest impact in the final. Besides that, his contributions for LAFC have been.
And he's gonna get a DP because he won the title for them. So
he was going to get a DP no matter what. He was going to get a DP no matter what.
Pozuelo should get a contract because he took Inter Miami to the playoffs. That is the truth.
I don't know if he should.
No.
I don't know if he
Listen,
should.
it was always Jose. It was always curious from the moment that they traded for him that they didn't sign him to a new deal. From that moment, I said that from the moment it happened. I was like, it's very interesting, borderline weird that. If they signed a DP number 10 or they added a DP number 10, that they don't lock him up long term. And I said it then. If they didn't lock him up, it's because they maybe don't see him as a long-term solution here. They just see him as a stopgap solution, as someone that can help them in the short term to make the playoffs because that was the best option they could find in the summer transfer window. A DP that's effective and a DP that already knows the league. Because if you bring someone from abroad, the transition period is there. The learning curve is there, and that tends to be a reason why players struggle initially when they come to MLS, foreign players. So now with more time, now with more, you don't have the stress of every single game or the pressure of every single game. Now they can go find a number 10 that's maybe 25, 26 in South America that they can sign and they can build around because it's not just about, yes, of course, it's about goals and assists, and it's something they touched on in the press conference, Phil Neville and Chris Henderson. But it's not just about goals and assists. It's not just about helping the team win games. It's also about the longer-term plan and the longer-term vision. And if you can sign a 25, 26-year-old player and he can come in here and play really well for 3 years, then maybe he has a sell-on value. And now you've earned money. Now you've made the owners money because you've sold him on for a higher transfer fee. Or if he plays well enough, that he stays here 8 years or 7 years, then you've got a DP now that's 7 years. I just don't think Pozuelo is a long-term player for what Inter Miami is trying to do, and I just don't think that he'll be back. That's just my opinion.
Let's be clear in the fact that long-term in MLS, it's not the same as long-term someplace else. Long-term here, it's 3 years. I mean, to be honest, even if you mentioned selling players. If you bring a 25-year-old, it's very rare that you're going to sell him when he's 29, 30. It's very rare. I think it can happen with a 22-year-old like Campana, and he plays 2 more seasons here, and he does well in those 2 seasons. He might go back, and you might be able to sell him. But the time frame here is different, and that's why.
So push the age back. Make it a 24-year-old. Make it a 24-year-old.
I don't agree with you with the fact that 31 is a problem for Pozuelo. I don't think it's a problem for him.
I do.
Because I think he proved last year that he can play at a high level. And
there's a reason why Toronto FC was no longer interested in keeping him. There was a reason why. And there's a reason why Inter Miami's not 100% sold on him. There's a reason why, Jose. There's a reason why two teams that are not upper echelon Eastern Conference teams, why they would pass on him. There's reasons for that.
There's going to be a time where Campana is going to move on, and at that time, it's not necessarily going to mean that Campana is a bad player, because Inter Miami wants to
I'm
move.
not saying Pozuelo's a bad player. Who's saying Pozuelo's a bad player? I just don't think long term
you're saying that the teams passed out on him, like,
for a reason. Because
what is the reason?
Long term, they don't see him in their plans. Long term, and I mean, Inter Miami hasn't passed on him yet. He could return. I don't see it happening, but he could return. I just don't think it happens. I don't see it. Like,
yeah, I think that's the bottom line, right?
Yeah, I don't think it's happening. Yeah, this discussion we have is because we don't think it's happening, but I think they should.
Yeah, we get into the conversation as to why is everything happening, but I think the bottom line is, okay, if they put him on hold, then, there might not be 100% sold on the idea of bringing him back. And then if you think on the player side, then nobody wants to be put on hold, right? And I think we can all agree that Pozuelo should be satisfied and should be okay with his performance with the team in 2022. And so I'm sure he believes he deserves a spot in the team. So, but if you're put on hold at this point and just to wait it out, I don't think it's going to be a good outcome. I don't see him coming back.
From the faint talks that I've heard he wants to come back. He likes Miami. He likes South Florida. But he's also willing to go elsewhere because he's towards the latter stages of his career. He's not going to get that many more big paydays. Is Inter Miami going to want to pay him DP money? I think if they could get him on a TAM deal, he comes back. Is he going to want to take that? Probably not.
That's the question.
Probably not. Probably
I
not.
think if you're able to sign him,
if you're able to sign him on a TAM deal, absolutely.
Oh, goodness. That would be a star for Chris Henderson. Absolutely. I mean, I'll give him a star. Absolutely. Because that would be a great deal. Great deal.
So let's quickly, last topic we'll touch on here, because it has to do with the DPs, and it was a talking point during the press conferences. Lionel Messi and the continued rumors. We're not going to go into whether he's coming or he's not coming, because Phil Neville and Chris Henderson mostly eluded those questions. They kind of sidestepped them, said it would be great to have someone of that caliber, but they don't want to touch on rumors of players that's not on their roster, yada, 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 all the cliches. But do you foresee an instance where Inter Miami could make it happen with one of their DP slots? I'll start with you, Jose, then Andrea, and then we'll wrap up this first segment. Because there's a chance that Inter Miami could have all three DPs signed before the season starts. But there's also a chance that they could leave one open for the summer.
And I think that's going to be very telling. That is going to be very telling. If they sign all three DPs, then, obviously it's not going to happen during the summer.
Can I time out you?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
All right.
Anytime.
Because before you get into that train of thought, I don't want to correct you, but I want to make sure the listeners understand that that's not necessarily true what you're saying. Because you could have three DPs at the start of the year, and if one of them, in terms of their salary budget, is low enough that you can buy them down, or buy their budget hit down, then that player can become a TAM player, which then frees up a DP spot. So I don't necessarily think that if just because they have three DPs at the start of the season, I don't think that necessarily rules out the chance that they go after Messi in the summer if he's available. I just want to make that clear, because that question was also brought up in the press conference, and it's not necessarily like, okay, it's either there's a DP slot open for him at the start of the year or there's not. Like, it could happen. You could also work out a trade. You could also cut a player if you need to. Like, there's ways. Listen, if Inter Miami has the realistic chance of bringing Lionel Messi, and MLS has the realistic chance of bringing Lionel Messi, they're making that happen one way or the other. They will find a rule. They will make a new rule. They will say 4 DPs from this point forward. We'll call it the Messi rule, whatever it is. But it would happen. Anyway, all right, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for doing that. But, maybe I should have explained a little bit better what I meant when I said three DPs is the fact that, okay, if you have three world class players, big names, right? Names that they are coming here with a superstar label, that that you're not gonna move around the budget or financial situations. They are three superstars, then he's not gonna be here, and the DPs.
But that's not happening, Jose. Jose, that's not happening. Like,
listen.
Campana's a young DP. Is he a superstar, big name? No, he's going to be a young DP by most accounts, right? Like, even Chris Henderson kind of alluded to that. So, or kind of even said it almost directly. So he'll be one of the DPs. He's not a superstar name. He's an Ecuador national team player. Okay, he's got some star power there, but he's not a superstar name. So it's not like, I don't think it's realistic to say that they're going to sign three big name DPs. Like, I don't think they're going the Lampard, Pirlo, David Villa route like NYCFC did back in 2014, 2015.
Well, you never know, but I'm just trying to explain the situation where I wouldn't see that happening if that was the case. If big names were coming, if I don't know, James Rodriguez, Luis Suarez, some stuff like that, names that we have heard before, then I don't see it happening. But let me tell you, I've been asking around, and it seems like there's a possibility. There's a possibility. I think
of what? Possibility of what?
Of Messi coming over. I think for him to be here right now at this point in his career, it's not the same as to when we started this conversation.
Andrea, do you think the chances are high that they only have two DPs at the start of the season, and they have that one spot vacant?
I see it as a big possibility.
I agree.
I would like to add one thing here before you make your comment, Franco, and it's something that Phil said, and he mentioned Toronto FC, and he said that Toronto brought players in July and it was too late. And then he said something that was really, really interesting, because he said, we are not going to make that mistake. And then he corrected himself and said, well, we're going to try not to make that mistake.
He did say that. We're going to try not to make that mistake.
Yeah,
but Chris Henderson left the door open. Chris Henderson did say it is an option that they sign two DPs at the start of the season and they leave one vacant. Now, again, I reiterate, if three are signed at the start of the season, that does not rule out the possibility of Messi coming, so long as they can buy down a budget hit of one of those three DPs and make them a TAM player. It's also a possibility you trade them, cut them, whatever you need. And again, if there's a real chance of Messi coming to Inter Miami, coming to MLS, it's happening. If it's not like MLS is not going to get Inter Miami's way and say, well, no, you can't do that. No, like MLS knows what Messi would stand for after a World Cup and the lead up to the 2026 World Cup, which will be in the U.S. Like, there will be a lot riding on it. So, all right, let's leave it there, guys, because we still have to talk about the expansion draft and do our Q&A session. So let's take a break. We'll do that after this. All right, guys, so before we get to the Q&A session, let's talk about the expansion draft, which is this week. It's on Friday, November 11th. The list of players eligible for selection for each team will come out on Thursday. So Inter Miami has some decisions to make as to which players they can protect for this expansion draft. And if you're unfamiliar with what an expansion draft is, well, I'll break it down for you very quickly. St. Louis City SC, which will enter the league, enter MLS in 2023, is having an expansion draft. It has 5 picks to select players on current MLS team rosters. Now, every MLS team is, except for 5 that had players, this is very MLS, but 5 teams are exempt from this expansion draft, from having players taken in this expansion draft, and that's because they had players taken during the 2021 expansion draft. Okay? Still with me? Hopefully? Okay. Anyway, Inter Miami is one of the teams that will have its players exposed to the expansion draft. Now, Inter Miami can protect some players, and those players are untouchable. In addition to that, there's other rules for like homegrown players or Generation Adidas players who have not graduated from their Generation Adidas contract, who are automatically protected and don't fall under the category of how many protected players an MLS team can have. This is very, very confusing, but anyway, this is the short term. Inter Miami will be able to protect 12 players on its roster from being selected by St. Louis City SC, as well as its homegrown players. So 12 players will not be up for the taking. Jose and Andrea, we could go into a very deep dive. We could probably do a whole show on just the expansion draft and like Inter Miami's thought processes. It would be fascinating to be a fly on the wall as Phil Neville, Chris Henderson, Jason Christ, and the staff try to figure out who to protect and who not to protect. Because I'm going to share some news that I've heard from sources this week. I have heard the St. Louis City SC is interested in one Harvey Neville. That's what I have heard. And clearly, Inter Miami is not going to want to lose Harvey Neville. Because one, that's Phil Neville's son. And two, they see him as a young prospect that provides cover at right back and at left back. Probably figures in their plans a bit more in 2023, which will be his first full season. So, what will happen here if they do try to select Harvey Neville? Right? Because Inter Miami's not going to protect Harvey Neville. That would be like a clear public miscue if they pick Harvey Neville over a veteran player like, I don't know, let's say Gregory, right? You protect Harvey Neville, but not Gregory. It's kind of pretty bad optics. So, if St. Louis City SC does go after Harvey Neville, if Inter Miami wants to keep him on the roster, they're going to have to trade something back to St. Louis City to keep Harvey Neville. And that would include, allocation money, maybe a draft pick. It just depends on what they negotiate. It usually tends to be allocation money in these situations. Anyway, Chris Henderson did kind of leave a little line there during his press conference where he kind of left that hint. He's like, we're in negotiations or we're in talks with St. Louis because obviously Inter Miami doesn't want to lose any players here. The goal is to not to lose players, right? But it's possible. So anyway, let's do this exercise. Starting with Andrea.
Thank God.
Which player, and you can take my Harvey Neville reporting into account or not, but give me another player that you think could be surprisingly left off the protected list by Inter Miami.
Gregory.
Interesting. Gregory. That's interesting.
Listen, they're trying to go for Busquets, so
that would be a horrible signing, by the way.
Yes, but
well, that was a short and sweet answer, but that's fine. We'll take that because usually we go long-winded. Jose, give me a player that we could see on there.
I would leave off the list. You say, right?
On the list.
No. Player
off the list.
A player off the list that's unprotected and it's
go to the other team.
Kieran Gibbs.
That's not a surprise.
I will leave off the list, Kieran. Oh, you want to be surprised? Maybe I missed something there. It's late. But I don't know. Kieran Gibbs was the one player that came to mind. I think you might be surprised if they left out Mabika or Sailor, but
there's no chance that Mabika or Sailor are not protected. I
think one of them will not be protected because you have Ian Frey that's coming up. Then you're going to have 10 central defenders.
Ian Frey's a homegrown, so he's already automatically protected.
Oh, but he's coming back.
No, but he's coming back. That is what I mean.
That's fine. That's fine. I mean, they clearly rate him. Listen, I've heard Damian Lowe is a possibility for being left unprotected, and clearly that would be a
surprise.
Yeah. That would be a player that could tempt St. Louis City SC.
Yeah.
But I do think because it's not just about talent in when you protect players. I mean, clearly that's one of the big components here of trying to create your protected list, but you also have to take into account salaries and all the other things that go into a salary cap league. So I fully expect Mabika. Look, I expect Mabika. I expect Sailor to both be protected. And I mean, I could give you a list of 12 players that I think could be protected, but again, then this exercise will get very, very long in this podcast. will never ever finish. So while I would be fascinated to do so, I really part of me really wants to give you a list of 12 players that I think could be protected just to see how close I am or how far I am. We'll just leave it there. Maybe I'll do it in my final thoughts. Maybe if I can write them down really quickly. But I would say, yeah, look out for Harvey Neville. Look out for Damian Lowe. It's possible that an Inter Miami player is selected in the draft, and then they're traded back to Inter Miami, or their rights are traded back to Inter Miami for allocation money. That's something that's very, very common in these expansion drafts. This goes far back as 2011, when the Montreal Impact, which is now CF Montreal, they took Brian Ching from the Houston Dynamo in the expansion draft ahead of what was supposed to be his final season as a professional, which led to some controversy. Eventually, after a few, I don't know if it was weeks, it might have been a couple months, after some time in the offseason, eventually the Montreal Impact traded Ching back to the Dynamo. I think they got a draft pick back. So look, it's
only in MLS,
right? It's
only
not. I mean,
MLS.
but listen, if I'm St. Louis City SC, and based on what I heard, I mean, it would be very smart of them to, if they see Harvey Neville unprotected, you go for Harvey Neville, right? Like, you maybe have no plans to play him ever, but you're going to get something from Inter Miami if you take Harvey Neville, because there's no way in heck Phil Neville's not going to have Harvey Neville on this team next year. There's just no way. And I also don't think if you're Inter Miami, you can afford the publicity of protecting him over somebody like, I don't know.
No, I don't think you can protect him.
Right.
But,
no, he hasn't proven anything for the team. Imagine if you
exactly.
want
it would be clear nepotism, right? It'd be clear nepotism.
Or Gregory out, and you protect Harvey Neville, it will be like eye-opening.
Right. I mean, it would be
that
like,
you have been right all along, even though we defended Phil with the nepotism claims in the past. You would, if they do that, you would have been right.
It would be a clear sign that there's nepotism, clear, right? So Inter Miami can't afford that publicly, probably. So they probably won't protect him. If I'm St. Louis,
good insight, Franco.
If I'm St. Louis, I'm going for Harvey Neville, and that's what I've heard is possible. So that could be why. You heard Chris Henderson say, I'm paraphrasing, we're in negotiations or we're in talks with St. Louis City SC. So, there you go. All right, very quickly, let's just dive into a couple questions here for our Q&A session. We have quite a few questions. We have some in English, we have some in Spanish. Let's do one of each. Do you guys want to start in English or do you guys want to start in Spanish?
Spanish.
All right, let's start with Spanish then, and we'll go with René Vallejo. And he asks, in Spanish, I'll translate in a moment, ¿Qué jugador franquicia ocupará la plaza que deja Higuaín? Translation is, which designated player will occupy the slot left open by Higuaín? I think the answer is very straightforward here. Jose.
Leo.
Campana's the young DP, but he's a DP nonetheless, and he will take that spot. I agree with you. Andrea?
Also, Leonardo Campana.
Okay. You know what? Let's do one more in Spanish. We're going to sneak one more in Spanish.
We are in agreement. Yes. Wow, this is the end of time.
I know.
Well, it is a full moon. There's also like hurricane.
A hurricane, yeah.
So
no, it makes it for a very boring podcast when we're all in agreement.
Yes.
It was like 1 minute.
It was like silence. It was like crickets. All right, let's do one more in Spanish before we hop to one in English. Carlos Segovia. ¿Qué posiciones deberían buscar como DP? ¿Qué posiciones son absolutamente necesarias para reforzar? So, translation. What positions should Inter Miami look for with their DP spots? And what positions are absolutely necessary to strengthen, bolster, reinforce? Let's try to keep it short, though. I know we're going to disagree, but let's try to keep it short. I will start. I feel like Jose's thinking. I feel like his brain is just like searching through. Wait till this is a video podcast. Then you're not going to be able to hide your thinking face. You look like Alan from The Hangover, right? When he's like trying to process all the cards and everything. That's what I felt like I saw you doing, even though I can't see you. All right, Andrea, your answer to those questions.
I think they should get an attacker, an attacking midfielder, and a central defensive midfielder.
You just gave me.
But they only have two
spots, Andrea.
But
We're assuming Pizarro's gone. We're assuming Pizarro's gone.
We're assuming Pizarro's
and
gone.
and Campana's coming back as a young DP. So let's just say two DP spots.
Two. Oh yeah. Then a central attacking midfielder and a striker.
And another striker. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Two DP strikers. I don't see that happening at all. I feel like Jose's still thinking because normally he would have chimed in by now.
Now I'm ready.
Okay, go.
I think they need a 10 if Pozuelo is. Pozuelo is not coming back, or if they bring him back, then he might be a DP. I don't know, but if he's not coming back, I think they need a 10, without a doubt. And I think
central attacking midfield.
Yes, I agree with you on that one. And I think they need a winger. I think they need a DP winger, and aligned with what MLS is when it comes to DPs. Most of the teams that they have DPs, they have attacking minded players. So
unless they go for a defensive midfielder who has a high profile, who's played for Barcelona, and who could give him una salida más limpia, a cleaner build out from the back.
That was in his good years, though.
I mean,
right now, not so much.
In MLS, he'd still have one of the cleanest touches in the entire league.
But he will be a step or two behind all the running.
Sure.
So
sure. Okay, but I'm with you, Jose. I just said that in there to try to divvy it up or make it a little different. But I'm with you. Again, I agree with you 100%. I think they go attacking midfielder, so number 10, and I think that they'll go for a winger. Messi. That's what I think that their
Messi,
strategy is.
He'll play like a striker here.
I don't know. That's it. I mean, that's a fascinating talking point and something we could discuss. Yeah. But I think Messi's at his best when he's out on the wing and he can.
Me too.
He has space
but that
to
is
take
why
the ball
I said striker, because I was thinking he could play as a striker here.
I don't think so. Like the physical center backs that are in MLS, talking about the Walker Zimmermans of the world, I don't think Messi. Listen, Messi. I'm not saying anything about his skill, but in terms of contesting.
Have you seen what he did to Jerome Boateng?
Contesting.
Who is 1,000 times bigger than any
contesting aerial balls and things like that is not Messi's strong suit. So I don't think.
No need.
Oh, okay, yeah. So all of a sudden, Damian Lowe, Amema Beak, and Ryan Saylor, for as well as I talked about a few of them earlier in the podcast, they're gonna all of a sudden have this super clean build out where they can pick out pinpoint passes from 60 yards away and find Messi at striker? I don't think so. They'd end up hurling those long balls forward, and Messi's gonna out jump 6'4", 6'5" physical specimens. Anyway, I see him as a winger. Okay, I see him as a winger. That's all right. No, we're not doing it. We're not going into a tangent on where Messi can play striker in MLS or not.
You're censoring us.
I'm not censoring you. I'm trying to be the ¿cómo se dice en español?
La voz de la conciencia, la voz de la razón.
Yes, I'm just trying to keep the show at a decent time, because we're definitely going to push the long meter here. Okay, and as for what positions are absolutely necessary to bolster, again, we don't know Inter Miami's budget hit or their budget situation exactly. We never know that. I would say, listen, we talked about the two DP spots. I think that left back spot remains a question mark. Kieran Gibbs is still on the roster. Breckshay and Jovan Jones are not, which we didn't even touch on the overall roster moves and the options that were declined. Maybe we can do that in the final thoughts, but I think that left back spot's still open there. Noah Allen will be a year older, so maybe he gets a little bit more playing time, as well as Harvey Neville. What, are you going to play Christopher McVeigh out there again a whole nother year?
That wouldn't be fair.
Listen, and I've said this before on the podcast, a winger, for sure. For sure a winger. You definitely need a winger. Whether it's a DP or not, you need to upgrade that position. So, all right, the one in English will go to Jason Siegel, because this name has popped up a good bit here on this podcast this week. What is the status of Ian Frey going into next season? If healthy, do you see him as a starter or regular contributor? So the last I saw of Ian Frey he was running around Inter Miami's training facility. He was running on the outside part of the field. So healthy enough to run. Not sure if he was doing football work by the time the season ended. So still working his way back. Do I see him as a starter or regular contributor? I see him contributing. I just don't know if he'll be regularly contributing. He's coming off 2 big injuries, they'll want to be very patient with him. They'll want to make sure this does not happen the third time. So I think that they could ease him into it. You could see him in certain moments, but I don't know if after back-to-back years of being injured, he'll be a regular contributor. I mean, he did look very good this preseason. He looked very, very good up until that injury, but I just don't know after 2 injuries if we'll see him get that much playing time, given his health situation. Do you guys agree, disagree?
I would say this. If he's able to come back and have another good preseason like the one he had in 2022,
he could start.
I would say he's a starter on this team.
Me too. Yeah.
He's 1,000% better than Mabika and Sailor.
1,000%, man.
Yes, I agree.
I think he's a lot better, but 1,000% better, man. Goodness gracious.
He's a lot better. A lot of upside for Ian Frey.
Yeah, he's a player that can grow. Mavika and Sailor can grow still, but they are tall players. Ian Frey is tall, not as tall as them, but he is, as a central defender, he's one of those rare central defenders who can play with the ball,
I agree with that.
Physical ability. And for me, last year when we saw that game that you talked about, Impact Montreal. What's the name now? Montreal, CF Montreal. He looked very good. I was excited to see him play this season. So hopefully he is 100% fit, because he could be one of those players of what we were talking about at the beginning of the podcast, of those young players that can go the long run.
He also played. He also played well against Lau and scored against Lau in that preseason game. So, but
it's a big if, because
right. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
2 injuries, like it's just
yeah.
First of all, you have to see if he's the same player. Like you can't just assume he's going to be the same exact player he was, especially after 2 devastating knee injuries. Hopefully, for his sake and his career, hopefully he can get back to being the showing the signs that he had before. But again, working his way back from a second injury, I think he has the tools, but we have to see what kind of player he is after coming back from a couple of injuries. And I think that they'll take the slower route with him. They're not going to force him back into it, or they're not going to. They'll be a lot more methodical. I'm not saying they weren't the first time, but they'll be even more methodical this time to make sure he doesn't have another issue like that.
Right.
You know what? One more in English. Tweeter. Will we lose the center back to St. Louis in the expansion draft? I can't see Inter Miami protecting all 4 of McVay, Lowe, Mabika, and Sailor. Who do you think Inter Miami FC will protect, and who will St. Louis target from Inter Miami FC? Also, is John McCarthy the first former Inter Miami CF player to win the MLS Cup? So we have to touch on that second question, man. John McCarthy, former Inter Miami goalkeeper, only played that first season in 2020 with the team. Started some games, but was predominantly the backup goalkeeper. He came off the bench for an injured Maxime Crepeau. I chuckle not for the injury to Maxime Crepeau, but just because of the incredible nature that was the storyline for John McCarthy. He comes off the bench in extra time of a tied game. He gives up a go-ahead goal late on. Then Gareth Bale scores a spectacular, dramatic header in the final seconds of the extra time to force penalty kicks, and then John McCarthy is the hero. Only 1 was scored on him, I believe, and 1 went over the crossbar, and then he saved 2. He was named the MLS Cup MVP for his efforts. So, congratulations to John McCarthy. Anything you guys want to add there with McCarthy? Anything?
No, not really.
Oh, nothing about the great story or the great game. That final was. I don't buy into the Don Garber.
For the Tampa Bay Rowdies, he's a USL Championship product. Very good. No, not very good, but an okay goalkeeper. Yeah, good for him. I'm not happy for him.
Jose, you're usually one of the first ones to pump up anything USL, and the fact that you just gave that flat delivery.
It's a very nice story. Listen, what he did was amazing, but let me tell you, the overtime, the last minutes were good of the game, but the overtime, those penalties were horrendous. Horrendous.
I even tweeted it during the final. I was like, this is something that MLS executives could only have dreamed of. And then they went into full MLS PR push during the post game by calling it the best game in MLS history. I was like, goodness gracious, MLS, you cannot help yourself. Like, really? Like, it was a dramatic game. It had a lot of twists. It had a lot of twists and turns. It had a lot of drama, but the game itself, especially in the first
was
90 minutes, was terrible.
It was horrible. Horrible.
But there you go. That they have to push their PR machine and say this was the best game in MLS history, just because they need to whatever.
It's like
they can't help themselves.
For us and our listeners that like comic book movies, like every time now that a movie comes out, you say, "Oh, it's the best Marvel movie." It's like that PR machine.
Okay, Andrea with the movie analysis as well. She's a movie critic as well as an Inter Miami critic. Okay, all right, that does it for the Q&A session. Very quickly, our final thoughts. There's still some things we haven't touched on, including the training stint that a couple of players will be going on, including the overall roster move, so there's a lot to chew on. We'll start with Andrea.
Well, we have a lot to talk about. I wanted to go last because I wanted to gloat with my final thoughts. They were going to be about something regarding to the World Cup and the U.S. men's national team and the goalkeepers that are going to go to Qatar. And I wanted to say that when I said Sean Johnson could be starting for the World Cup, I got laughed at on this podcast by my co-host, Franco Panizo, and I just wanted to say, Franco, how are things looking up now?
You still think he's going to start? Like, you still think he's going to start?
My sources are telling me that Stephen is not going to the World Cup, and Turner is slightly injured. He has not played with Arsenal, and Horvath is going to be the other goalkeeper that is going to the World Cup. So let's see. Hopefully my gloat can become a reality.
I don't see Johnson starting. I don't see him starting. Like, I still don't see him starting. He could be on that plane, but I don't see him starting. I stick with that. So, I don't see Greg Berhalter turning to Sean Johnson over those other two options. Just don't see that. Jose, your final thought.
My final thought is, the perfect preview for the World Cup happens on Sunday night at 8:30 p.m. San Antonio against Lou City, baby. The USO Championship final. We can't wait for that game. That's a perfect ending to the soccer season here in the U.S. Two of the best teams in the league, champion of the West against champion of the East, and the best part, the game will be available on ESPN Deportes in Spanish, and Jose will be on the call. So
Jose who?
Jose Island Jose.
You're referring to yourself in the third person. Oh, please let the listeners know that, because they just might be like Jose. That Jose's not the most uncommon name out there. It's a pretty common name. Come on, brother. If you're talking about yourself, let the people know so they can go listen
Island
to you.
Will be on the broadcast. There you go.
And you might even see him hum Loquera if you watch closely enough. My final thought will be on a couple of Inter Miami news and notes here that we did not touch on in this podcast or earlier in this podcast because we just had so much else to talk about. But Gonzalo Higuain won the MLS Comeback Player of the Year award officially. Not so sure about that myself personally. Definitely think he had a great year, but not really sure what he was coming back from. It's usually an award given to a player that came back from an injury. I definitely think he deserved to be the Inter Miami MVP as he was named by the team, but not so sure about being voted the MLS Comeback Player of the Year. I do think that's, again, part of the MLS PR machine trying to draw attention. Obviously, Higuain's a big name. All right, then the next talking point. Well, Drake Callender finished in the top 3 for goalkeepers of the year, but he did not win. That award went to Andre Blake. Now, in terms of the roster decisions that have been made, out of contract players right now, Jovan Jones, Alejandro Pozuelo, Indiana Vasilev. Contract options decline. Brett Shea, George Acosta, Higuain's name also in there, even though he retired. Contract options exercise. Drake Callender, Leo Campana, Bryce Duke, Ariel Lassiter, Ryan Saylor, and the one that had Jose's head scratching, Robbie Robinson. The rest of the team,
unbelievable.
The rest of the team is under contract for 2023, and I'll go through them very quickly. Noah Allen, Edison Escona, CJ Dos Santos, Ian Frey, Kieran Gibbs, Gregory, Leandro Gonzalez Pires, Corentin Jean, a.k.a. Coco, Damian Lowe, Amema Bika, Nick Marsman, Chris McVeigh, Gene Mota, Harvey Neville, Rodolfo Pizarro, Emerson Rodriguez, Robert Taylor, Victor Ulloa, Felipe Valencia, DeAndre Yedlin. And that leads me to my final nugget here, and that Edison Escona and Robbie Robinson will go on a training stint, not a trial, but a training stint with Real Zaragoza, Inter Miami's partner club, the other club that Jorge Mas and Jose Mas now own. So, there you go. A lot of final thoughts, and thank you again for listening to a jam-packed Miami Total Football Radio episode. We will be back, I don't know if in a week, maybe 2 weeks. We'll see. We'll see how things go. We'll see how things unfold.
For the World Cup, baby.
Yeah, well, definitely going to talk about the expansion draft after it happens, especially if things unfold the way that I'm hearing that they might. So, you know what? Let's say we'll be back next week. So, for Andrea Yanez, a.k.a. Ajicita, who wasn't all that Ajicita today, a little bit here and there, but not overall. That was fake hype, MLS hype machine type stuff from Andrea there. And for Jose Armando, a.k.a. Island Jose, I am Franco Panizo. You have been listening to Miami Total Football Radio. Talk to you guys again